This is your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope you guys are having a good one out there today. Marcus Fuller, who covers college basketball for the Star Tribune, will join me here in just a little bit. Marcus had an interesting story over the weekend on the impact of the transfer portal on college basketball, and not just on, coaching and recruiting and how all these teams are constructed, but also impacting high school players, especially those who maybe are kind of on the fringes of being recruited and, maybe aren't having the same experience that they once had, because a lot of these schools are now looking at more experienced players in the transfer portal. So an interesting conversation with Marcus. He had some really good, real life examples of that in his story that was in Sunday's Star Tribune. You can still find that on startribune.com on the Gophers page. So please go take a look at that if you are interested after you listen to the podcast segment. Sad news, but some closure for the Barber family. We'll get to that in a little bit. Marion Barber III's death ruled heat stroke. We'll get into that, like I said, here in a little bit, but just a really sad story all around. First, what did I miss? I'm going to talk about the Twins here for a little bit at the jump. Kind of feels like a pretty important 6-game stretch for them coming up against Milwaukee for 2. Milwaukee's a good team. They're about like the Twins this year record-wise, just like a half a game separating those two teams record-wise, and then 4 against the White Sox before the All-Star break. Now, the White Sox series, of course, carries implications of the division, things like that. The White Sox trying to get on track after, so much struggles so far this year. They were the prohibitive favorites in the division coming into the year, but they are still, sitting at 41 and 44, 5.5 games behind the Twins, the Cleveland Guardians, 42 and 42. They're 4 games back, and the Twins 48 and 40, 4 games up in the division. Nobody really running away with this, but nobody really challenging the Twins to a big extent. I mean, remember a couple weeks ago, when Cleveland caught up to them, in the midst of all those blown saves, those bullpen meltdowns, and it kind of seemed like, well, maybe Cleveland's going to make its move. Twins are going to fall back. And then Cleveland just kind of fell apart again, and the Twins played a little bit better. And all of a sudden, their lead was back up to 4 games. Now, I say this is important for a couple reasons. One, like I said, Milwaukee's a good team. Chicago's a division team. 2, Twins are going to send Josh Winder and Joe Ryan to the mound against Milwaukee for a couple of matchups that should be favorable to them. Both Milwaukee starters have ERAs in the mid-4s. Ryan and Winder have ERAs in the low 3s, have been a pretty good story for the Twins this season. Ryan has been pretty consistent all year. He's had a couple clunkers here and there. Winder, 6 of his 8 starts have been very good, including his last 2 since coming back. So, both of those guys have a chance to not just give the Twins good starts, but really kind of show their place in this rotation. I mean, Joe Ryan certainly is more established already. Winder's been a little bit up and down, but I would imagine he is in the rotation to stay if he continues to pitch the way he has pitched with, like I said, an ERA in the low 3s. So can those 2 young Twins pitchers deliver in what seems to me like a pretty important series? The second piece of why it's important is they've been playing a lot of games, 88 games in 93 days it will be, as they head into the All-Star break after these 6 games. They're, I'm sure they're kind of coasting in on fumes at this point. They've played 88 games already this year. Cleveland's only played 83. They've just had a lot of action so far, and that's got to be taxing on a bullpen that's been overworked as it is. It's got to be taxing on even everyday players as they kind of come back into, what is a normal paced year, things like that. So can they avoid the temptation of shutting it down early? Can they avoid, a mental lapse that would, send them into the break on this homestand with, a 2-4 stretch, or, even worse than that. I mean, 3-3, I guess, would be okay, be kind of holding serve in the division, but can they finish this first half, which has been, by and large, very good, right? We've complained plenty about some of how it's gotten done. We've complained about those heartbreaking losses. We've complained about the bullpen blowing leads, but by and large, this has been a successful year. They're 48-40. Statistically, they're pretty good in every category. They are, surprisingly good after last year's 73-89 finish. So can they carry some momentum into the break and then convince management that this is a team that, isn't just a nice little story, is a team that is going to be in contention for the rest of the year and is worth adding to as the trade deadline rolls around in early August. So I see these 6 games as kind of an early barometer for what's going to happen in late July, early August around the trade deadline, and I see it as a way for them to kind of continue on this path. And if they can surge into the break, I think that'll make people feel a lot better about where they are. If they stumble a little bit, I think there are going to be some legitimate questions about this team. So watch for that as they play Milwaukee and Chicago in the next 6 games.
Switch your checking account to Royal Credit Union and discover a better way to bank. Royal Credit Union is a financial co-op, not a corporation, so we return earnings to our members. That means you get low or no fees for account services and better rates on deposits and loans. You'll also have all the digital tools you need at your fingertips, so managing your account is easy. Royal is ready to help you discover the credit union difference. Switch your checking account to Royal Credit Union today at rcu.org/yourchecking. Insured by NCUA.
I'm happy to have Marcus Fuller on Daily Delivery today. Marcus had a really interesting story in Sunday's paper on the transfer portal and just kind of the impact on how this, how the new rules of recruiting are impacting, not just teams, but the athletes themselves. And I thought it was very interesting. So I wanted to have you on to talk about that a little bit more. Marcus, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on. It's been a little bit, but the off season, we still got a lot going on. Obviously, you mentioned the portal and recruiting, and so it's just it's good to be back on.
I agree. It's good to have you back on. So you wrote about the impact on student athletes trying to get recruited into college, and you put a good face on kind of the issue. Maybe kind of summarize it. It sounds to me like colleges are focusing more and more on the portal and less on, maybe the less proven players coming out of high school. And that's kind of creating some issues, especially for players who, may not be those obvious, 5-star, 4-star recruits.
Right. Yeah. First off, thanks for mentioning the article. It was actually something that I started working on in the spring. That's really when the AAU season starts for, not only high school seniors to be, but also athletes who are unsigned or uncommitted seniors that have actually finished their eligibility in high school. These athletes have a chance to still play in AAU, depending on their age. Some of them actually reclassify and do a 5th year high school, and then to continue playing. And I just noticed, a lot on social media, you see offers that people mention. Well, in the past year or so, they've been talking a lot about the lack of offers and the fact that they're really struggling getting attention from college coaches, because a lot of these coaches will be saving scholarships for transfers. The portal is outrageous, and it's, they call it the Wild Wild West. It just continues to increase. I got recent NCAA numbers for 2022, which I don't think have been published too much yet. And they're just unbelievable. I mean, over 5,000 for football, combining FCS and FBS, almost 2,000 for men's basketball, and then women's basketball is not far behind. And other sports are increasing as well, including volleyball. So, what does this mean? I had a lot of questions after my story, talking about, well, the numbers, have they changed for how many scholarships that that these coaches have? No, not really. I mean, obviously you have COVID-19 super seniors
Right.
and you'll continue to see that this year. But for the most part, they're just choosing a transfer over a high school senior, and they might have more scholarships to offer because there are a lot of players transferring out of their program. But again, you won't replace all of your scholarships if you lose transfers to high school seniors, but you would obviously save some of them for a high school senior, which we're seeing less and less of that right now.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing is, like, I wonder, the portal, the one-time transfer where you can transfer without having to sit out a year. That rule is still fairly new, right? It was April of 21, and that happened right in the middle of the pandemic, as coaches are, adapting to different recruiting things anyway. And not that it was hastily approved, because obviously it had been in the works for a while, but as you've talked to, coaches, administrators, whoever it is, even at the high school level, do you think that the way it's playing out, that how many kids are in the portal, how much this is impacting recruiting both ways? Do you think they had a semblance of an idea that this is how it was going to go, especially this fast?
Yeah, I mean, nobody could have predicted, what would happen. Again, you talked about it from the coaches, administrators, from their perspective. They were like, "Oh, hold on, we don't know if this is a good idea," but they understood. Okay, it's good to give these players and these athletes, some freedom, right? I mean, coaches can move whenever they want in college, and what about athletes? Let's give them more freedom, more flexibility. So from the college athlete perspective, it was a home run. It was like, okay, wow, let's have this opportunity. If I want to leave, I shouldn't be held back, have to sit out. But from the high school athlete perspective, before they get to college, they could not have imagined that it would take away their opportunities. I'm talking more Division I, but also Division II and III, because they're looking to get, maybe, hey, I can get a Division II transfer if you're D3, or maybe I can get a D1 transfer if you're D2. So a lot of these kids, some of them, like I wrote about, Alonzo Dodd from South St. Paul, he was first team All Metro 2 years in a row for us. He had an outstanding career at South St. Paul. I think they had their best record ever. And, he nearly averaged a triple double. He played for Grassroots Sizzle, who produced Chet Holmgren and Jalen Suggs. He was a starter on that team, very productive, but he had no Division I offer after his high school career was over. And, he's wondering, okay, why did this happen? Some people might say, oh, well, you're not good enough. That remains to be seen, from the college coach's perspective. But I think for the most part, everything lined up, right? Played for the really good AAU team, had a productive high school career. I mean, a lot of people are saying, hey, how come the Gophers, haven't been after him? But I think a lot of it has been because of the portal. And he even said it so himself, that coaches were really excited about him and they were tracking him. But they told him flat out, like, I lost some transfers, or I lost some players to transfer. And, I just feel more comfortable bringing in a player more experienced than you as a high school senior coming in. And we'll continue to monitor you. And eventually he did get a Division I scholarship offer, but it was from a school that's transitioning from D2 to D1, right? So they could afford to make that. I don't want to say gamble, because, like I said, a lot of people think he's good enough to play Division I. It's just, maybe the experience factor played in there. And then again, another player on the women's side, Ronnie Porter, was a Como Park All Metro player that we had. And she ends up not having a Division I offer after her high school season was over. And then all of a sudden, Wisconsin flies in, likes her a lot, and offers her, and she commits to Wisconsin. She goes from not having Division I offers to playing in the Big Ten next year. But again, that was a Wisconsin team, not obviously a team transitioning Division I, but you have a new coach there who is really going all in on youth and development. And that's one of the sections of my story was youth over experience. Some coaches like Ben Johnson and this woman from the Badgers, They rather have young players in there they can develop, and then hopefully down the road turn their program around rather than bring in transfers that they come in and out in a year and then you have to start all over again.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of like when people would look for jobs, you'd say, how can you get a job without experience? How can you get experience without a job? It's almost like that with high school players. Like if these coaches are looking for experienced players, good players, it's like, well, how do you know if someone who's, done it at a smaller school or done it at a different level, how do you know that player is necessarily better than the player coming in? But it is the proven commodity nature of it. And you mentioned Ben Johnson. I wanted to pivot to that a little bit because we both saw Ben at the same event in Stillwater maybe a month or two ago, that Coach's Caravan, and I talked to him there, and a lot of the talk there was about the portal and just how both he and Lindsey Whalen talked about how recruiting now as a coach, you've got to as soon as the season ends, you're kind of re-recruiting your own players to make sure they don't leave in the portal. You're recruiting the portal itself, and you're still recruiting these high school kids. It's kind of become this all-consuming thing when, whereas before there might have been some of that, but not nearly as much of that. How do you think he is adapting and adjusting to that?
Yeah, he's a new coach. It's his second year, really first full off-season recruiting. So he was obviously inheriting a team that had a lot of players who were unhappy and frustrated, and he lost 10 players to the portal. He had to scramble and not have really much of a staff when he started adding players to his roster, and they were mostly transfers. This time around, he loses only one player to the portal, right? And he has an idea about what his system, how he wants to play, and he signed 4 recruits from high school. Now, I think in another year where he loses maybe more players to the portal, he might want to add more experience, right? But right now, he said flat out, I'm going to not use 2 scholarships as of now. I'm not going to use 2 scholarships. And you might think, okay, why would you do that? And you don't want to. You want to add more depth on your team, not lose depth. But he's thinking, okay, if I bring in a transfer to, let's say grad transfers that are seniors, that'll take away playing opportunities for my young players,
sure,
my freshmen, who he thinks can really help the team. So, some coaches will bring in 2 transfers anyway, just to have depth. But he's going to the extreme and saying, I'm not even filling those last 2 scholarships because I don't want the potential of, a guy taking away an opportunity from my younger player. And maybe even, maybe disrupting the team a little bit because the younger player is looking over his shoulder. Right.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, that's kind of an extreme tactic, but it's one where he's saying, I value high school seniors, ones that fit in my system, ones I can develop, and then they have maybe a more potential down the road than a transfer coming in where it's a huge gamble, right? I mean, these guys are already made players. Either they're going to sink or swim right away, and really there's no future other than this season.
Yeah.
And it's worked out in the past. I mean, they had some transfers that the Gophers have had even before Ben Johnson that have come in and impacted right away and changed the culture of the program in 1 year. But there aren't that many of those guys out there. And so I think in his case, he's saying, I think these freshmen can help us out right away. And I think that they need to develop. And I can't do that if I have too many transfers on my team.
Do you think at some point there will be a correction? If whenever there's a new rule and it, like the wild, wild west, like you mentioned, like we've talked about before, it kind of becomes this like free for all where nobody exactly knows, what they're supposed to be doing, but they're like, wow, we can go get any player we want. Let's go do it. Do you imagine either the rule is going to have to get tweaked in some way or that there will be a philosophical shift? Or do you just think this is kind of the way that college sports, college basketball will kind of operate for the time being going forward?
I think this is just the new age of college sports. And I think the portal is obviously nuts, but I don't want to say people are ignoring it, but I think the issue, again, using maybe the wrong word, the issue. I think the talk of right now, the buzz right now is NIL.
Yeah.
So it's kind of shifted from the portal talk, which is not changing anytime soon. Kids are going to be able to leave and then play right away, depending on certain things, right? Academically, how they are and everything. And there's still waivers out there. There's a lot of kids, including a transfer for the Gophers in Dawson Garcia. This is his second transfer or third transfer. I'm sorry, second. He went to Marquette from Marquette to North Carolina and North Carolina to Minnesota. So he's going to need a waiver, which I think he'll get. No information update on that yet. Maybe soon. But there's a lot of transfers that have to get waivers. And that's kind of the muddy water right now, is how does that waiver process go? And people are still talking about that. But as far as the portal, one-time transfers, that's not the issue at hand. It's more NIL, which affects not only transfers, because there's transfers that are getting lured in for NIL, but also high school recruiting. And so I think that right now is the talk about coaches. I think the NCAA this offseason made a change in the NIL rules, and that boosters cannot be directly involved, and they're continuing to probably tweak that to try to make it more of an even playing field. But again, what is really even playing field when it comes to recruiting? Just like transfers. I mean, these kids are leaving sometimes high major schools to go to a better high major school. The kids are leaving mid majors and they're averaging 20 points a game to go to a high major and sit on the bench or come off the bench and be part of a winning program. Obviously, the Gophers lost Marcus Carr to Texas. So I think what we're seeing right now is pretty much, flying by the seat of your pants type of recruiting. And then the teams like the Gophers, where Ben Johnson has a luxury because he is a new coach, right? A lot of these coaches that are tenured and maybe on the hot seat, they feel pressured to win right away, win now, and they're going to go more with experience than gamble on a high school recruit that they have to develop, and they might not have 2 or 3 years to develop them.
Good points. Let's shift gears for just a few minutes here at the end of our discussion. It does sound like the Gophers got a recruit. Ben Johnson has added someone to the class. Where is their recruiting stand for now?
Well, Ben Johnson added a 6'8" senior, Caden Betts. He's from Colorado. He plays for a Pluto basketball program, an AAU program in Colorado Springs, and he had a great weekend in Atlanta in the Prep Hoops Live tournament there. He had 40 points in a game, and he's really an all-around player. He can play on the wing. He played in the post in high school just because his team didn't have much size. He actually is transferring to a prep school, Huntington Prep in West Virginia, so that he can play on the wing and continue to grow and expand his game. And hopefully, he says, I talked to him recently that he's hoping to make an impact as a freshman for the Gophers, not this coming season, but the following season as a 6'8" wing, shooting the ball, attacking the basket, and just the all-around talent. And this is the first player that Ben Johnson's has committed in the 2023 class. And it just so happens that he's from out of state. So I think that's a kind of a neat thing where you're seeing a shift in, initially he signed a bunch of Minnesota kids,
right?
Four of them. And now his first recruit is out of state. Not to say that he's not prioritizing Minnesota players, but he also sees that, we can find, talent that's matching what he can get in Minnesota, or maybe even better at certain positions.
And they're still doing their summer workouts now. It feels like there's just not much of an off season for them anymore. How much has that changed since you started even covering this team a while back?
I think it's pretty similar. I think what's changed some of the rules where coaches can spend more time with players in the summer. Yes, it used to be more limited during the week. There's a little bit more time, but also, again, like we've talked about from the beginning, what's never stopping is recruiting, but also now transfers. They're still looking at transfers all the time. You're looking at the portal, and I don't think they'll bring in any more players this year, but he does have 2 scholarships. And then also, how does NIL affect recruiting? I think those are the two biggest changes where it's always on the coach's mind. And
Yeah.
they were out, this early July period, watching players, scouring the country for talent. But they also think, hey, how many scholarships am I going to have for next year? And how many do I want to use on high school recruits? Well, they have one that they've taken on a high school recruit right now.
Well, good stuff, Marcus. Go read Marcus's story, Star Tribune, startribune.com. If you have not read that yet, good depth on just kind of where things are at right now. Marcus, have a good summer. I'm sure we'll check in with you again here in not too long, but until then, be well. All right.
Appreciate it. Always love being on Daily Delivery.
Always like catching up with Marcus. We didn't even talk Big Ten expansion because Chip and I covered that ground quite a bit on an earlier podcast. So appreciate Marcus, though. He had a good piece kind of talking about how competitive USC and UCLA will be in the Big Ten, particularly in men's basketball. I didn't realize USC was so good last season. I mean, everybody talks about UCLA. They were 27-8 last year. They made it to the Sweet 16. USC had a disappointing NCAA tournament appearance. They lost in the first round, but they went 26-8 last season and were very good. So, and now they've recorded a bunch of 20-win seasons in a row, made it to 4 NCAA tournaments in the past 7 years. So they are a program on the rise. So that's something to watch as we kind of go forward here. Both those programs have very good teams, not just in in some of these other competitive sports. So watch out for that as the Big Ten expansion continues to dominate the headlines. Let's move on for just a minute to the very sad news of Marion Barber. We got the official police medical examiner report on what led to his death on June 1st, when he was found dead on June 1st in his Frisco, Texas apartment. The official cause of death has been ruled heat stroke. According to the autopsy report, there was a bathtub faucet in his apartment that was running, and the unit's thermostat was set to 91 degrees. I'm reading from the Wire story, 91 degrees with the heat turned on. And the coroner wrote in his report that Mr. Barber was known to exercise in sauna-like conditions. Sounds like he had been in the apartment for several days and not heard of. So, you never want to, it's one of those things where you don't want to know, and I guess you probably do want to know if you're the family. You want to have some sort of closure in this case, and at least they have this closure of what happened, even if it is tragic and sad. Let's finish with the cooler. Important game for the Lynx tonight coming out of the All-Star break. They play Phoenix. 10-14 Phoenix, Lynx 8-15, but winners of 5 of 7 going into the break. Can the Lynx, who are second to last in the league right now, rally so far that they get up to that number 8 seed in the league and make the postseason for another year? They've made it every year since 2011. They've got work to do, but they've got an opportunity. They've got a chance to do it because there's the teams they're chasing above them. They're 2.5 games behind. Remember, this is a 36-game WNBA season this year, so something like 8-5 might get it done. They get them to 16-20, get them to that last spot. We'll see. It would take a much better, consistent stretch than we've seen aside from those last 7 games, but they've definitely started to play better basketball. And an opportunity to play Phoenix tonight, and a big one at that, because that is one of the teams they are chasing and trying to pass in the standings. That'll do it for me today. Thanks for joining me here on Daily Delivery. We'll have an outdoors segment on Wednesday's show with Bob Timmons. Hope you enjoy that. Be back at it again tomorrow.